Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me for today's webinar. There are 10 of you online so far, and there are about just under 40 registered. So if you don't mind just giving them a minute or so to join, I can see that the count's going up. Everybody's obviously just got back from the pub, if only. Anyway, but if you could bear with me, please, that'd be great. Cheers. Thanks a lot. Okay, hi there. So as I said, thank you very much everybody for joining us. More people have now joined, so we'll get started. What I wanted to say at the beginning, basically the idea of this webinar is to go over the latest Nebula platform release, basically, which is we know as Nebula 9.2. Any email announcements come out and so on and so forth, it's referenced as 9.2. At the end of these webinars, you should get sent the slide deck. So this slide deck is actually quite large. It's 144 slides. What I thought I'd do is I'm not going to go through all of them. At a certain point, I'm going to race through them to the next feature. But what I did think is there's a lot of this slide deck has come from some training that we did a few weeks ago, and it's actually really useful. So I've left a lot of that information in there, but there just simply isn't enough time on a 30-minute webinar to go through it. But because you will get the slide deck afterwards automatically, I've left this information in there. So apologies if I race through some things maybe too fast, but my name is Nigel Canning, sales engineer for the South. If you want to go over it in detail afterwards or next week or whatever, just send me an email, nigel.canning@sizewell.co.uk, or have a chat with your distribution account manager. They can always get in touch with me or hook us up. So I thought that you'd get all the information now, you could quietly have a read of it and then get back to us. So the gist of where I'm coming from today is I want to try and get across hopefully where you can use these features or what the update is about, make the most of it, but consider it for sort of solutions or services that you'll create longer term going forward. Anyway, I'll shut up now and get on with it. Anyway, thank you very much indeed. Here we go. So basically, as I said, we know it's Nebula Phase 9.2. Obviously, roughly every 3 or 6 months, there's a Nebula phase update, which includes new devices, new features, so on and so forth, and that's what this is all about. So right at the beginning, I've put some links that are quite useful. I use them as well, so I'm just sharing them. You can go to these various links and you can see what the 9.2 features are all about. What I also have put up there, and that's kind of daft, there's also an 8.2 release feature set as well. We've only really started to do some of these webinars that are covering a particular release recently, and I'm not really sure that perhaps 8.2 is fully covered. So I've put 8.2 on there as well, because there's things like dynamic VLANs and stuff like that. But anyway, the links are really useful. Have a read, please. So the agenda is really basically, it's broken up into improvements for the Nebula Control Center, hence NCC, increases and improvements and changes to access points, Wi-Fi, NAP, and anything to do with switching, NSW, anything to do with the gateway, NSG. So that's what they mean in the slides. So the first thing is the user interface enhancements. So basically, this is an example of some of the training slides that we had and so on and so forth. So you've got the old view of the summary report range in the past, where basically you could select time range, which is a maximum of 6 months. But a lot of people preferred the idea of being able to go back, say, a year, but only get 30 days. So we've changed it slightly now so that the maximum range is 30 days, but you can go back a year. So quite a small thing, but for maybe legality things and stuff like that, it's actually quite useful. The other thing in the user interface enhancements is basically from an access point and a gateway client's display filter point of view, you can now show all clients that are currently online. And there's also this definition of an online client, which going to sound strange to say, isn't it, that it's an offline client that was online within a certain time frame, which you specify in that time frame of 2 hours, 24 hours, 7 days, or 30 days, as you can see what it says there. And also there's this concept of policy clients, which basically, if they meet the policy, which is the definition of the filter, basically, you can display any clients that were whitelisted or blacklisted, or blocked rather, in and out of the time frame. The time frame doesn't apply. It's to do with the policy matching. So they're just small improvements to sort of filtering out and tracking down clients and seeing who's online, so on and so forth. The next thing is to do with remote access enhancements. Basically, what we're doing, we're just changing the sort of the rules, the access control list, so that non-owners can actually establish a remote connection if required. Although you will have to have the administrator required level will have to be, as it says in the list there, the organization owner, full, read-only, or none. So it's just a small change, but here it is defined in here, basically. Another thing which is very much to do with services, I don't know if you've come across yet, obviously we've got quite a focus on Nebula and managed services, the MSP program. One of the classic things that obviously you can do as an integrator or reseller with us is to brand the Nebula portal with your own icons and things like that. So basically, the MSP branding and the way you can customize it, basically, you can allow common users with administrative access to Nebula to actually configure the distributor's logo and service portal information and so on and so forth. The things that you can customize is the logo, so that when your customer logs into the portal, they'll see your logo and your information and your support request information. The important thing to point out about this is that this is a Nebula professional pack feature. So if you don't have professional licensing applied, you don't have the MSP branding option. But obviously, as I said just a minute ago, services in general and allowing you to create a network service for your customers is a key point for us this year, and hence obviously there's the Zeisel MSP program, and obviously Nebula professional licensing is a key part of that, so we will be supporting you on that. So which organization can apply branding? So basically, the branding logo is under the MSP portal configuration page of the Nebula Control Center. Only organizations which have professional pack licensing applied can apply the branding. And obviously the other thing is that you need to be the owner of the organization. So if you were somebody from another organization that had administrative rights, you can't go in there and change your branding. And this is just a screenshot from the Nebula Control Center screen. So basically on the left-hand side, you can see what Nebula looks like normally at the moment. You've got the Nebula Control Center logo. What you can do, for instance, is change that to a custom logo, which basically, and this is just an example, obviously we just put in Zeisel as an example. And on the next page, one of the useful things about these kind of training slides that we get given, and why I've passed them on, is that these are really the rules of the icon and so on and so forth. So it's telling you what the pixel width and height definitions are, locating the file, what you need to do it, and obviously selecting and applying the custom logo. But basically, you can't go and create some massive fancy icon which is huge and then expect to apply it, because it's just a corner logo and stuff like that. The other thing, of course, what you can do is you can apply a customized support contact. So basically you can present your users, if you're providing a service to somebody and you're letting them access Nebula, obviously the support and the contact that you might like to maintain with your customer can be your email address and your support at yourcompany.com rather than Nebula or Zeisel's contact details. So you just go into the help and the support request page, change it, and off you go. And then when ready, raise online support, it will go to you, and then obviously you can then either talk to them or back that support off to us. And these are just additional information about how to do that and so on and so forth. So quite a useful feature, particularly an encouraged thing to do with MSP as well. So a number of people ask what happens when the Nebula professional licensing expires. So with this, trying to make this a little bit clearer on any slides we give out. So in this instance, obviously you can see that basically the organization will be grayed out. The dashboard logo returns the default logo. Support request message is disabled and it goes back to normal. So then, you know, we're not going to, the system doesn't stop working, but obviously you lose the advantage of that particular feature. Obviously, when the license is reapplied, which we hope it would be, it all comes back. The next thing is quite small, but it's actually the license management calculator. I know licensing for Nebula, some people find confusing. Once you understand the basics, it tends to be fine. But what they're trying to do now with the license calculator is basically just help users calculate what additional licensing points are required, but actually to bring it together, because if you've ever done it, there's two parts to it. There's the Nebula Control Center, which is the core platform. And then there's, if you've got the security gateways, then you need the Nebula security signatures, which is the NSS calculation. There used to be sort of two parts to it. I don't know if you've ever done it, sort of a left and right side of it. Basically what they're doing now, they're bringing it together, but also if you did need to license it online, there's a link to a web store if you want to take advantage of it, or basically obviously the other option is to co-terminate the licensing and produce point and specify the number of points that are required, rather than maybe just go and buy a 1-year license or a lifetime license. Some people prefer to do it on quarterly points or 6 months points. So this is a screen of the revised, sorry, this is a copy of the current revised one. So you can see that what you'd normally do is you'd set a combined co-termination date under a particular organization. This, what we're talking about here is licensing per organization, not at the roots of the MSP tree. This is a per organization licensing. And then obviously it tells you how many points of Nebula Control Center are required, how many points of Nebula Security Service. And then you can go and either buy the points broken down as close as you possibly can, because if it says, say, I don't know, 170 points, you can see there the granularity of it. You obviously just buy and perhaps exceed them by a few points as well, or carry on buying yearly, or go a limited lifetime if that's what you prefer to do. Now we move on to Wi-Fi and access points. So there are some relatively minor enhancements, but they're actually pretty good. You may have already heard about the smart mesh, basically where you can roll out your access points in a wide connection, configure them, run them up, enable smart mesh, and then maybe take one of them off of the wide connection, give it power, and bring it back up again, and it will automatically create a mesh to support those. The other thing that's coming up in a minute, I'm just going to mention this because smart mesh is up there. There's a bridging coming up as well, which is really good. But the gist of this smart mesh improvement is obviously that our AX series access points are now coming under smart mesh. We've added the 1302 access point to wireless health, so that's hospitality. And on the radio channel width side of things, we've added 160 megahertz channel widths on the 5G radio spectrum, if you would like to use it. So there's a nice little table here which basically tries to specify the other features in the table, in the columns rather, which are the dynamic pre-shaped keys and NAT. I'm going to come to that separately, so don't worry about that too much. The idea of this matrix for the next 2 slides is what access point, I've got to go forward and come back. So what access point has got what feature, then you can see if you've already got various access points rolled out, can you take advantage of this already, or do you need a more modern access point? But basically the key things there are wireless bridge, dynamic pre-shaped keys, and such and so on and so on and so forth. So it's quite a useful little table. There you go. Obviously, the dynamic pre-shaped key tends to be taking advantage of modern features in modern Wi-Fi 6 or AX access points. As you can see there, if I go back, you'll see that none of the current access points support that. That's a feature of a modern Wi-Fi 6 or AX chipset. Excuse me. Then the next thing is just a reminder about Nebula Flex access points, which basically is that these 2 AX access points are now added to Nebula Control Center, so you can register and manage these with the default access point firmware 6.1 already supports cloud mode. So these access points are out or just about to come out as well. So the whole Wi-Fi 6 AX access point range is continually increasing. the whole point about Nebula Flex and Nebula Flex Professional is that the Nebula Flex does not come with a bundle with a license, as you can see there. So it's Nebula Flex, no license bundle. A Nebula Flex Pro device, which in this case is the WAX 610D, does come with 1 year of Nebula Professional. So that's the difference between Nebula Flex and Nebula Flex Professional, and that's probably one of the key things that does sometimes catch people out on licensing and stuff like that, unfortunately. So the next thing is a really useful feature, which is basically dynamic personal pre-shared keys. So I'll just go over where a lot of people use them and why they need them. So basically, it's an application of WPA2 personal protocol. So obviously at home, most people are probably connected to their broadband router with this type of encryption. So you don't enter a username when you connect to your router. You just enter a fixed password, and then the WPA2 exchange takes place, and you create a secure channel. Now, other things like captive portals, so on and so forth, and authentication accounts that you use normally require a username and password. Whereas if you think about it, a fixed device, say some sort of IoT device, simple IoT device, or within hospitality that you just want to give out a password, not a username and password, because most of these sort of dynamic captive portal arrangements require a username and password, and you don't want to do that. You just want to keep it simple and give out a password. So really, a way I sometimes think of this, which might sound a bit weird, is I think about it backwards. Like the passwords are unique to a user, and it's almost done backwards, so that almost like the password is the username in a strange sense. I'll come to that in a minute. So basically, just a user gets given a dynamically created pre-shared key, and that's what they use to access the network. Basically, it's a unique password or unique encryption key. The rules are that only one SSID within the organization can be enabled for dynamic personal pre-shared keys. It does support dynamic VLANs, but it cannot be used with certain other security methods, which are made clear in a few slides coming up. And this feature, as it says at the bottom, this is hugely advantageous feature, and it requires the Nebula Professional Pack. One of the advantages of this is, if you think about it, is obviously if people do manage to sniff packets and manage to break the encryption, by having multiple dynamically created pre-shared keys, it can give you increased security in the sense there's an awful lot more processing that would have to go on. So as this diagram shows here, you've got 3 passwords created, that ends up with 3 encryption keys, so that your amount of work to hack the network is substantially higher. Oops, next slide. The way you configure this is within the access point configuration authentication screen, and if you've got an access point that meets the supported model list, which you can obtain by clicking on the blue model list link there, you then get up the screen to allow you to create the dynamic keys. Mac-based authentication cannot be used with this, so you won't be able to use that. And obviously, one of the things that they do have, there's a backup key to associate if required, although obviously you can enter that, but you don't have to give it out to anybody. So where are the keys actually stored? Basically, the accounts are actually configured in the cloud authentication page, and the Nebula Control Center loads those accounts into the access point, the local access point. And obviously, when you do authentication, it adds them and removes them from the system. Wireless clients can connect with the pre-shared key, even if the access point cannot reach the Nebula Control Center. So that's an important thing. So if for some reason internet access was down, the system has still got those accounts loaded within the access point, so people will still be able to authenticate against the local network if there are local network resources that they would like to use. This is the screen. This is an example of the DPSK screen and how you can use it under cloud authentication. So if you've got that kind of mechanism, you can basically generate a certain number of dynamic keys on this particular screen. and you can seed the passwords and so on and so forth. So basically, when you go and create, you can either create single or batch DPPSK accounts at the beginning of the account creation screen. What you can also do is you can get the you can put an email address in, and you can get the keys automatically emailed over to the end user or the administrator, perhaps of a batch of keys. The username is optional, and it's probably important to point out what the username is, because the key itself could be, for instance, shared to, so you could give the key out to 10 people. Obviously, you would then know that that password is associated with up to 10 people, and you wouldn't be able to identify which of the 10 people it is. If you put a username in, the advantage of the username for each key created, and it only applies if you give the username and password out to, sorry, if you give the password out to an individual, is when you look at various logs and monitoring screens, the system knows which key is being used, and then it can work backwards and tell you what the username is. Otherwise, all you would see is there's this, horrendously complicated key, and you're not going to know who the username is. So the username here is for you to be able to really work out from a monitoring and logging point of view which key is actually being used. So basically for tracking the client, basically. This is an example of what one of the keys will look like in an email. So this is actually one of the batch ones, and there are 3 keys associated with that. So from the point of view of one of the key uses of it is like in hospitality. So maybe you had 20 keys that you wanted to give out to 20 people that have arrived, and you can generate a key, get it emailed to the administrator within the hotel, and they can just cut the keys up and print them out and give them to the users. There are certain maximums that we ought to let you know. So as it says here, Nebula users can create an unlimited number of accounts, but only 2,048 entries can be authorized at any given time. So if a created account exceeds 2,048, new accounts will remain unauthorized. So obviously 2,048 accounts associated with an access point is a huge number. So it's not really an unrealistic limitation. So there's certain rules about when the clients are disconnected. So when the account has expired, which is part of the creation, you can specify when it expires. Obviously, once the account expires or it's been changed to not authorized, you can't connect. If the user changes the client account details, or if the VLAN ID changes, then basically the clients will be disconnected, and those are the rules for that. Basically, so if you've got a site that supports DPSK, and so basically access points that are supported or not supported, the Nebula Control Center does not show any error messages, and obviously non-supported models will disable the SSID that has DPPSK enabled. So if somebody was to roam to an area with an access point that doesn't support DPPSK, you just won't see that SSID. Once again, the rules for when the license expires. So that particular SSID with the PPSK will disappear. And the user must change to license-free wireless LAN security feature before re-enabling the SSID. And then it must manually re-enable the SSID after putting the license back in. So the configuration is not lost, but you just have to go through these predefined steps to re-enable it. This is just an example basically of showing the client username based on the pre-shared key username in the column. So if you did not enter a username in the key, you wouldn't see any sensible information in the user column. And this is really I would recommend clearly that you enter a username when you create a key. Obviously, if you're going to create a batch, that's going to be difficult. So it depends how you want to use it. You could obviously put a username or some sort of suffix in there and track back yourself, but it would give you a group ID, a group user basically. So it's definitely worth doing. Then there's another sort of unique feature that's been added to certain access points, this thing called NAT mode. So the idea of this, and it is on a per SSID basis, basically clients that connect to that access point are NATed behind the access point. There's a very simple DHCP mechanism for those clients. And there's a very simple, essentially outbound only firewall on the access point as well, and a simple access point log. This is one of the slide deck parts that I'm going to zoom through quite quickly because there's quite a bit of information on it, and to be honest, there isn't enough time. So the idea of this basically is to provide a minimum hardware requirement within, say, a small shop or a cafe. So rather than have to have a gateway and so on and so forth, what you can do is you can basically use the access point as a sort of combined gateway as well. So basically you'd enable this feature on an access point, and all of the clients are natted behind the access point itself. There's an example here. So the Nebula access point may enable or disable the NAT mode by an individual SSID. So the guests can be all natted behind the guest SSID, but users in the office can obviously be on a non-natted network. So it's quite flexible. It's quite simple. It's not, we're not trying to do away with needing NSGs and firewall security devices, but it's just a simple thing that people had asked for, literally for one access point within a cafe, something like that. There are various rules associated with, because to keep the DHCP implementation and the firewall rules and stuff like very simple, there are certain classes of IP4 address ranges that the devices will use depending on what the local management IP. So obviously there could be simple clashes. So basically there are certain rules which are in these slides. This is where the NAT mode is enabled. So all the rules for this are in the slide. So I am going to zoom through this, but you can see that if you had IP address conflicts, you would just change the pool to the different range so that everything would still work basically. So, and these are the rules within the slides as to what to do. So I will just zoom through because it's quite involved. Now, one of the things that I think is really useful from my point of view is wireless bridge mode. A lot of people have obviously mentioned it in the past in relation to smart mesh, but this time what it is if you've got smart mesh switched on and you enable wireless bridge mode on a supported access point, what you get is that the Ethernet port on the bridge to network is now usable. So that, for instance, as this example shows here, switches on the bridge side of it connected to an access point that is supported and has got enabled for smart mesh and bridge mode, it will work, and the switch and all clients hanging off of the switch will be part of the overall network. And as it says here, basically it's an extension of smart mesh. Obviously people that have used USGs and NXCs with bridge mode will understand what this is, but now it's come over to Nebula. There are a whole bunch of rules in terms of which is the root access point, which is the repeater, so on and so forth. So these are basically in this table here. I'm going to go forward with this fairly quickly because if you need bridge mode, then you will quietly need to read these slides, and that's why I've put them in basically. So how do you enable it? Basically, you must have smart mesh enabled, and wireless bridge mode must be manually enabled in the access point detail page, which is an example of this on this screen. So you'll see on the detail page, wireless bridge disable or enabled, and you can see that, and then you can put a list of the allowed VLANs over it and so on and so forth. One of the things I need to point out is, you can see the tag where it says beta. Unfortunately, this is I won't blame Taiwan. It's basically, they use that phrase not because it's of beta quality or it's expected to fail or anything like that. It would be far better if they just said new feature. Use the blue diamond icon and just put new feature. It's just to remind people that it's new feature. Putting beta in probably gives the wrong impression. This isn't some beta feature that we're trying to push out to users to test for us. It's a properly implemented feature. It's a new feature, but it's actually really good because you can now use Nebula with smart mesh and bridging mode to actually take your network further into the building via meshing mechanisms. So basically there's a whole series of rules in here about when to use wireless bridge mode. As I say, I'm going to zoom through, but all of the rules and the sequences for falling back and so on and so forth, on what channels what frequencies they prefer and so on and so forth is all defined in these slides. So it also mentions on here what happens if you can't do and doesn't support wireless bridge mode. It gives some examples of the allowed VLAN list, so on and so forth, and synchronizing allowed VLAN lists. And then it gives some useful things about, if a device doesn't support, I'm going to go through this quite quickly, but how not to create a loop, so on and so forth. But what you can do in various scenarios is basically, just showing you the provisioning and so on and so forth. But you can actually create some redundancy as well. One of the useful things, that's how to verify it, is, here we go, Smart Mesh Failover. So because of all the work that's gone into bridge mode, and obviously Smart Mesh was already there, one of the things it will help with is Smart Mesh Failover. So what you can do now, which is very clever, if you've got a Smart Mesh connection, sorry, if you've got a wired connection to access points and you want some resiliency, you can now use Smart Mesh to create that resiliency. So if that wired connection back to the gateway failed, the Smart Mesh would come into the play to create a link back to the switch that's lost the wired connection. Basically, if the access point can't reach the default gateway, then it starts to use the mesh. But so that's an extension basically of Smart Mesh, and it's taking advantage of the wireless bridge features that have come to the fore. And these are the rules for when the failover will happen. And you can see the configuration screen, what to do. The next thing is wireless health enhancements. I know we've had half an hour, so I will try and speed up a bit. Basically, the wireless health features have gone down really well. And what we have realized with a lot of the analysis that's been done on all of the information that's been captured by the system during health issues, it's all to do with dynamic channel selection and changing the channel width and so on and so forth. So the actual rules before were to use to change the channel width during optimization. We've realized that the better way of doing that is to use the adaptive channel width as one of the things to go and vary first of all. And what these slides do is they give you the rules as to what triggers the, this is a recap, what triggered it before. As a result of obviously using dynamic channel selection, you have to wait 4 hours for various reasons. Whereas if you use optimization using the channel width, you can reduce that time window substantially unless it happens multiple times and when the lock will come in. So these slides here present what the change is, what the retry counts are, so on and so forth, what happens with regards to reducing the channel width, when to retry, so on and so forth. So it's quite a sophisticated feature, but it's all part of the advantages of wireless health and how you can switch on automatic wireless health performance improvements. So as I said, I need to go through it quickly. But if you do get the slide, well, not if, you'll get the slides, read the slides if you're interested in it, but it is a really good feature. And we're explaining in the slides why we've changed from one to the other. An important thing to point out now is that the Nebula security switches, the so-called CCTV switches, they were always Nebula enabled, but their default Nebula control center setting was switched off because the Nebula platform backend work wasn't due to be released until 9.2. So now these switches are able to be configured and managed via Nebula. Just a reminder that the GS1350 series, they are Nebula Flex professional devices. It only applies to the GS1350, not the unmanaged CCTV switches. So these are all Nebula Flex Pro switches, so they are a switch that comes with a professional license. So you can carry on managing them standalone if you want, or you can now bring them into Nebula and manage them, and it comes with 1 year of licensing. The features that are supported within the cloud are continuous PoE, extended PoE range, the auto PoE detection recovery system, and the surveillance support. One of the things that's important to point out, on the initial release of the GS1350s, the Nebula Discovery was disabled by default. So when you power up one of these switches, they will not try by default to connect to Nebula. So all you need to do to move it over to Nebula is to go into the local interface, change it to active in the Nebula Control Center Discovery, and then reboot it. Obviously save the configuration, and then when it comes up, once you've registered that device's serial number and MAC address on Nebula, it will be manageable and discovered under Nebula. Obviously the configuration will have to be put back in because you're now managing it via Nebula. So obviously make a note of what the configuration is, register the serial number within Nebula, put the configuration into Nebula if you like first of all, and then bring it up having changed the active Nebula Control Center discovery to be yes or tick. There are certain features that clearly this type of switch does not support, and that's spanning tree guard, access control lists, obviously IGMP, which is multicast TV type features, they don't apply. So that's the list of features that don't apply to these switches under Nebula. And this is a summary of various switches, in fact, including the GS2220, as to what features are supported on what model switches. These are just useful tables. Then we've got some of the features. If you know the CCTV switches, I really am going to race through these. Basically, the extended cable length feature and the rules for it are in there. You can basically enable the extended cable length within the GUI, what the considerations of them are. How do you do that? You just go into extended cable length option under the particular port and enable it, and then the rules for that are displayed. The best thing we always say is test a particular camera at a maximum. It tends to be related to cable quality. Just make sure you use good quality cable, then you can get to the full 200 MHz or beyond. Once again, the rules as to what happens if the license expires, because this is a professional feature. The extended cable length range gets grayed out. It does not allow you to change that, but the link will remain at 10 meg and it will carry on working as a feature, but you won't be able to change the configuration. There's another feature which is auto PoE discovery. So basically, if a device goes down or is lost, we have a feature now that goes through an automatic power cycling mechanism. If the CCTV device or whatever the device is at the other end is detected as being down, it's effectively an automated way of unplugging and replugging the power cord or pressing and holding the reset button on a particular device. So all the rules for it are in here. You can either do the detection of a failed device by ping, ICMP, or you can use LLDP as a detection mechanism. The new GS2220 series of switches also support this feature, because it is actually, people have realized it's very useful for automatically trying to create a more reliable network. So if you've got a voice over IP phone that's gone down due to ping detecting it or LLDP picking it up, you can go through an agreed power cycle. These next few slides are basically they give you all of how to configure it, how to specify the detection mode, all of the resume polling intervals. So there's a whole load of information in these slides so that you can understand what the mechanisms are. So I'm going to race through those, because if you want to use it, then go and read these slides and so on and so forth. Some other features that are now available using LLDP from switches, you'll be able to work out what the client IP address is via LLDP if all the devices support it. So it's just useful for getting more information into the display to find out what's going on. So basically, it's a logical link protocol, basically vendor neutral RFC, I think, in terms of specification. So if devices support it, switches and gateways and devices can work out what is actually connected, and you can get a sensible feedback from the device automatically. It comes into its own in a minute in some other features, so I'm going to go through it, basically to do with CCTV, voice over IP phone configuration, and so on and so forth. And this is just giving you details about how it works technically. So one of the really useful features about LLDP and the media endpoint discovery which is an enhancement of LLDP, is if you take a modern switch, Nebula switch that supports these features, and you've got a voice over IP phone, it enables you to create policies and VLANs and so on and so forth, and priorities that can be automatically rolled out much more simply. So basically, the voice over IP phone will send a frame when it powers up, asking for what policy to apply to the phone, and it will get sent back by the switch. You used to be able to do this via one of the ways you could do it before, excuse me, is using the organizational unique identifier, so the MAC address, the first 3 bytes of the MAC address of the phone, for instance. But using MED, you can basically apply a policy to the phone automatically. So if you've got a laptop behind the switch port on the phone, you can create the VLANs and so on and so forth. So when you used to do the sort of the voice VLAN setup using an organizational unique ID, this is what would be going on. When you use it via MED, you've got more flexibility because basically you're using tagged traffic. So the laptop, for instance, that's hanging off of a switch port from the phone is on a different VLAN, so on and so forth. So it's the more modern way of applying automatically voice over IP phones or whatever using policy and organizationally unique identifiers. Where to configure it is on here, which switch support it, which switch doesn't support it, and then things like the differential service code points and things like that. Zoom through this. Basically, this is just basically saying that certain surveillance features are supported by the professional license, like as I said, export extended range, health, so on and so forth, and where you can see this on the monitoring page of the switch that comes up, and you can see the extended range. Are you seeing errors? CRC or cyclic redundancy codes. So if the frames are being corrupted in any way, it either means you have gone the cabling is poor, or there's some interference or something like that. So this is basically more information about the surveillance connected devices. So realistically, you shouldn't really get any of these errors. If you are getting errors, these are screens that help you determine what's going on. There's been a slight change in the Voiceland configuration where you enter the OAU. Whereas before you tended to enter a mask with it, now you can enter as many bytes as you like, depending on how you want to do it. So basically, these organizationally unique identifiers, they are a unique identifier that, for instance, identifies a Zyxel switch or an SNOM phone or whatever. But it's the organization's ID. It's not the individual device. It's the organizational device. It's the manufacturer, basically. You can think of the OUI as a manufacturer. So I just take a drink. So it's a slight change there. Nearly there. One thing that's been tweaked on the gateway is that basically when you go and configure a remote access client under the level 2 tunneling protocol configuration screen, what you can now do now, it will email out a suitable script for, as you can say, Windows, macOS, and iOS. So there are various rules. It's a professional feature. In terms of the VPN server IP that it will use the NSG's public internet IP address. So it makes it really simple and straightforward to create remote access accounts, and they get emailed out to the end user. The email script itself, obviously you put the email address in there and so on and so forth. There are some rules that you need to apply. Obviously, for a script to run under Windows, it needs to be normally a .bat file or perhaps a PowerShell script. But basically, obviously, if you try and email over a script that's added onto an email, most firewalls or anti-spam filtering, security filtering devices will block it out. So we're sending it out as a file type .bat file. So all you need to do is rename it to .bat, run it on your local PC, and job's done. These are a whole series of rules in here about the script email list where it's going to go to. So we'll zoom through in here because I know we're short time. But basically, it makes a really straightforward way of adding a Windows or an iOS remote access connection using the NSG. So apologies that I had to zoom through in the end. I knew it would be probably tight for 30 minutes, but there's a lot of information that I have raced through in the slides, but you will get the slides. If there are any core concepts you want me to chat about, or any questions you want me to answer, I'll stay on now for quite a while. I would remind people about the MSP program. Just go to msp.zyxel.com. It's where we're coming from. A lot of these features that have gone into 9.2 are really to help with services. So for instance, things like the LLDP and voice over IP phones, it's all to do with perhaps creating a service which is you want to offer Wi-Fi, a desktop, PC or laptop connection, and a voice over IP phone per person, per desk, per month, all those kind of things, and to make these efficiently creatable, supportable, manageable, simple to create remote access accounts, all those things that will hopefully help you. What I should also mention, I'm not sure if people are aware, is these are the current promotions that are on at the moment. So if you need either of these two switches at the moment, up until the end of September, these additional discounts are valid. The discounts are already applied to distribution, so the pricing that they will quote is already discounted. So thank you very much indeed, everybody. Apologies that I raced through at the end. I hope you have a good afternoon, a nice weekend, and stay safe. I will stay on the line, answer any questions if I can. If I can't answer them, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. As I said, if If you need anything extra, my email address is nigel.canning@zeisel.co.uk. Just ping me an email and I will try and help. Anyway, thank you very much indeed.